will be Dominican Father Bob Berry, the Associate Director of the John Paul II Newman Center.
Welcome and good morning. I have the delightful opportunity to introduce an old friend. John Haas and I were doctoral students together so many years ago I can't remember. I'm pretty sure he was...
It seemed like yesterday.
I'm pretty sure he was a good-looking guy way back then. The only reason I say it is because he has a lot of kids, so he must have been a pretty good-looking guy. How many did you have when you left home this morning?
9 at last count.
9, okay, at last count, okay. John Haas is a good friend of mine. We haven't seen each other for years here. He is now the president of the National Catholic Conference Bioethics Center in Boston. And his presentation this morning is going to be the Magisterium on the cutting-edge evangelization and culture. Welcome.
In fact, Father and I both studied under one of the other speakers here today, and that's Dr. William May, when we were at Catholic University together. For benefits of time, I have my son's little stopwatch here, and we'll just go right through the presentation to try to stay as close to schedule as possible. The man across the table from me was articulate, passionate, zealous, brilliant, principled, and committed to doing good. I had sat spellbound as he delivered for my personal benefit one of the most fascinating and lucid microbiology lectures I had ever heard. He was also engaged in research which I found absolutely morally reprehensible. His company, Advanced Cell Technology, was taking the DNA from human somatic cells, placing it in enucleated cow's eggs, and beginning the cloning process for a human being. The organism would be allowed to grow to a mass of about 100 cells before it would be dissected to obtain embryonic cells for research. These were cloned human beings with cow mitochondrial genetic material mixed in. The company had no interest in producing cross-species creatures. Its activities were driven by concerns of simple research, efficiency, and cost control. For the cloning process, cows' eggs were easier and cheaper to obtain than human ova. Also, the cow's eggs were bigger than human eggs and easier to work with. These were utilitarian concerns, pure and simple. But as we spoke in his boardroom, in his laboratories, human embryos were lying in petri dishes, subjected to experimentation, dissected and killed, frozen for future use. Human embryos. Embryonic human beings. It does not matter how it is put, these were beings who were human. Poet, philosopher, theologians within our cultural tradition once spoke of the transcendent worth and inviolability of our kind, of the human being. Legislators, jurists, warriors, and police once protected the innocent of our species from the first moment of conception. The medical profession from the time of the pagan Hippocrates swore never to kill the unborn child. In more recent times, the World Medical Association adopted the Declaration of Geneva, which includes an oath for physicians to take upon beginning their medical career, in which they vow, "I will maintain the utmost respect for human life from the time of conception." It was human life which engendered such awe, the creature before whom we stood in reverence. For in this creature, we saw even more than ourselves. We could see the very image of God Himself. We were not simply one species among others. As the psalmist and later the apostle would declare, "What is man, O Lord, that thou art mindful of him, the Son of Man, that you care for him? You have made him a little lower than the angels. You have crowned him with glory and honor, subjecting all things under his feet." The bard and playwright Shakespeare declared with equal eloquence, "What a piece of work is man! how noble in reason, how infinite in faculties, in action, how like an angel, in apprehension, how like a god, the beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. But it was man's God-like qualities which set him apart. His dignity was a participatory dignity, for one alone is truly good, the one in whose image we knew we had been created and by whom we had been redeemed. That living reality which engendered such reverence now lies in untold numbers of petri dishes. Those formerly awe-inspiring beings are now experimented upon, dissected, cloned, frozen in suspended animation in countless containers of liquid nitrogen. Man has been increasingly stripped of his godlike qualities, even as he presumes to act more and more like God. One of the developers of in vitro fertilization has declared that it would be a sin to bring a deformed child into the world. But the God whom we worship is described in this way. There were many who were astonished at him, so marred was his appearance. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him, a man of suffering and acquainted with infirmity. That is the God of whom we had stood in awe and whom we would see and venerate in the weakest, the sickest, the most vulnerable among us. Now, in our contemporary culture of death, these are the very ones who are viewed as expendable, as the source of cells, tissue, organs for the benefit of others. It is the overarching philosophy of abject materialism which has robbed man of his dignity. The supposed material origins of even human life are not even questioned in our day. The Princeton molecular biologist Lee Silver states boldly what he believes to be the truth. Most biologists, he declares solemnly, believe that life had to coalesce spontaneously from inanimate matter on Earth. Yet the position which is truly unreasonable is that this creature, noble in reason, infinite in faculties, could have spontaneously arisen from inanimate matter. In truth, we cannot properly speak of man without speaking of the one who created him. In fact, without his creator, man is quite fundamentally unintelligible. In his book, Existentialism, the atheist Jean-Paul Sartre says there is no human nature because there is no God to creatively conceive it. The Catholic German philosopher Joseph Pieper maintained that Sartre's logic was unassailable. If his premise is accepted, that is, there is no God, then his conclusion would naturally follow there is no human nature. Pieper pointed out that anything has a nature by virtue of its having been created. A pair of eyeglasses are eyeglasses precisely because that is what they have been created to be. The creator of anything bestows the nature upon what has been created. If there is no creator God, then there is no human nature as such. Human beings would simply be so much raw material, so much stuff to be manipulated and used, redirected and reconstituted at the whim of those who had power over them. Human dignity, and then the safeguards put in place to acknowledge and protect that dignity, had derived in our civilization primarily from our recognition that we had a creator. Innocent human life was sacred because the one in whose image it was created and by whom it was created was known and acknowledged as sacred. However, today we live in a society which is so desacralized, so secularized, that nothing is sacred any longer, not even innocent human life. In fact, not only is human life no longer regarded as sacred, it is no longer even understood for what it is. Having lost sight of God, we no longer understand even who or what man is. Medical science now treats man as veterinary medicine had dealt with lower animals. Contraceptive and reproductive techniques, some of which have been around for centuries, were never applied to human beings until our own day. Camel drivers on caravans would want to prevent the female camels from becoming pregnant during the trek across the desert, so they would simply thrust a stone up into the uterus. Centuries later, in America, we would thrust IUDs into women's uteruses, a technique long ago used on camels. I remember reading a Planned Parenthood brochure in which the Guttmacher Institute was quoted saying that they didn't even understand medically exactly how the intrauterine device kept a woman from becoming pregnant. But nonetheless, there it was in her uterus. As you know, one drug company was forced into bankruptcy because of all the lawsuits brought against it, because of pelvic inflammatory disease and even death, which resulted from intrauterine devices. Artificial insemination has long been standard in the breeding of cattle. We now do it to women. Human life in its coming into being is no longer considered human life and may be subjected to experimentation and the ignominy of cryopreservation. We no longer treat human beings with the awe and reverence due to those endowed with the divine image. The words of the Second Vatican Council have proven to be prophetic in our own day. We read in the Pastoral Constitution of the Church in the Modern World, Gaudium et Spes, when God is forgotten, the creature itself grows unintelligible. When Karol Wojtyła wrote his first encyclical as Pope John Paul II, he dedicated it to the human person and warned of the implications of this practical atheism of the West. Man's situation in the modern world, wrote John Paul, seems indeed to be far removed from the objective demands of the moral order, from the requirements of justice, and even more of social love. We are dealing here only with that which found expression in the Creator's first message to man at the moment in which he was giving him the earth to subdue it. This first message was confirmed by Christ the Lord in the mystery of the redemption. The essential meaning of his kingship and dominion of man over the visible world, which the Creator himself gave man for this task, consists in the priority of ethics over technology, in the primacy of the person over things, and in the superiority of spirit over matter." End quote. As the English cultural historian Christopher Dawson put it in his Progress and Religion, it is the religious impulse which supplies the cohesive force which unifies a society and a culture. A society which has lost its religion becomes sooner or later a society which has lost its soul. End quote. And when the soul of a society has been lost, it is man himself who ultimately suffers. As our Holy Father has said, we have before us here a great drama that can leave nobody indifferent. The person who, on the one hand, is trying to draw the maximum profit, and on the other hand, is paying the price in damage and injury, is always man. End quote. What has this meant for man as the biotech century dawns? Myriad new ways have been developed for engendering human life, and many result in man paying the price in damage and injury, even as he tries to draw the maximum profit. Surrogate mothers are often indigent women who are willing to subject themselves to being artificially inseminated, and to the dangers of pregnancy, and to the relinquishing of the rights and obligations toward their own child for the fee to be earned through the procedure. To ensure a greater chance of a successful pregnancy through in vitro fertilization, several embryos will be engendered, Only the healthy will survive the petri dish. Once a number of embryos have been implanted in the woman's womb, only one will usually survive so-called fetal reduction. What appear to be good and noble undertakings result in the wastage of human life and a violation of the integrity of marriage. When I met with the CEO of Advanced Cell Technology, we talked for literally hours. I was there for 5.5 hours. I mean, we really engaged one another in conversation. And we got a little personal. You know, how did you get into your work? How did you get into yours? And he said, I was raised a Nazarene. I don't know if there are any Nazarenes in the room, but if there are, he was one of you. But Michael West said, I was raised a Nazarene, but he said, I loved science. And he said, I read every science book I could get my hands on. But then he said, the day came where I came to a crossroads in my life. And I had to make a decision between God or science. And he looked at me and he pointed his finger at me. This is the guy using human DNA and enucleated cow's eggs. He looked at me and he said, and I chose God. And I remember to this day taking my arm and sweeping those science books off the table onto the floor. I said, Michael, that was the problem. You were raised in the wrong religious tradition. I said, no Catholic or somebody raised within a classical Christian tradition would think they would have to make a decision between God or science. It's the one source of all truth is God himself. I said, what'd you do then? He said, I went to study paleontology. I said, wait, I thought you gave up science. Well, yes, he said, but I wanted to be able to prove the theory of evolution wrong in the book of Genesis right. Well, guess what? He couldn't do it. So he came to the crossroads again, and he said, this time I chose science. I said, Michael, there's no incompatibility between the two. I said, the Bishop of Rome, the Pope of the Church, recently wrote an encyclical called Fides et Ratio, of faith and reason, discussing the compatibility between the two. This man, the brilliant man that I was sitting across the table from, expressed absolute astonishment that any religious author, much less the Pope, would write a document on the compatibility between faith and reason, between science and religion. Then he was astonished to find out that in 1987, the Holy See had issued a document known as Donum Vitae, the gift of life, dealing with moral assessments of different techniques for overcoming infertility. This man was astonished to find out that in 1987, the church had come out with a document with a whole section on the moral status of the embryo. He was really flabbergasted when he found out that Donum Vitae in 1987 had condemned cloning as a means of engendering new human life. Because as he said to me, in 1987, the scientific community thought it was still impossible to clone mammals. This was 10 years before Dolly was cloned. And already the Holy See was issuing a document indicating that this would be an illicit way to engender human life and a violation of human dignity. At the same time, in the same document, the Holy See condemned the engendering of human life through parthenogenesis, a technique which has been developed, albeit not yet successfully, in only the last few months. How is it that the church would have been able to anticipate and morally assess means of engendering life even before it occurred? The church can accomplish such tasks because it is, as Pope Paul VI said, the expert in humanity. The church knows the positive relationship between faith and reason, between science and religion. The church knows human nature, both in its created state, in its fallen condition, and its redeemed state. The church and her magisterium knows whence man has come and whither he is going. The church knows the purposes for which man was created, and so can unerringly judge whether certain actions will thwart those purposes or advance them. It is impossible to address the ethical issues in the area of reproductive technologies or cloning or stem cell research without seeing that the debates surrounding these issues take place in a cultural context, a context which fundamentally shapes the debate itself and gives meaning to the words being used. The truth is that in any society, there is always a dominant view of the world which frames the debates, and which is so pervasive that it is not even questioned. There are certain cultural presuppositions in our own society which are the starting points for conversation, for public policy, for our common life. These presuppositions function as kinds of cultural coordinates which help navigate society from one point to the next. They are not questioned any more than sailors would question the position of the stars by which they navigate from port to port. There are indeed a number of such cultural coordinates, and the ones most prominent in our society go by the names of moral relativism, utilitarianism, human autonomy. I suppose the one word which has come to embody them all in popular culture is, and was already used, choice. I will choose whether I live or die. And if you are sufficiently weak and vulnerable and dependent, I will choose whether you live or die. Our Holy Father gave us a remarkably insightful encyclical a few years ago entitled Evangelium Vitae, or the Gospel of Life. Some people hailed this encyclical as a tremendous advance in the development of moral doctrine. But I would submit that the encyclical, while presenting very clear, forceful, and unequivocal teachings on the immorality of direct killing, of abortion, and euthanasia, cannot be seen as an advance, since those teachings have always been in place, both in the hearts of men, as St. Paul reminds us in Romans, as well as in the written word of God, thou shalt not murder. What the encyclical does is to provide a penetrating reflection upon and analysis of the underlying cultural presuppositions which have given rise to what the Holy Father has called the culture of death. The encyclical is fundamentally a critique of culture, our culture, advanced, technological, secularized culture. The Pope poses more a cultural question than a moral one when he asks in the encyclical, how is it possible that what was abhorred as a crime in very recent history has now come to be claimed as a human right, such as abortion? How is it possible? What has happened, he points out in the encyclical, what has happened culturally is that the dominant liberal, enlightenment, secularist worldview has now come to dominate in our society and has suppressed, has choked off any mode of discourse which acknowledges the spiritual, the transcendent, the supernatural, the divine. As a consequence, it is impossible to understand what is the nature of the human person who even in his natural state is the image of the ineffable God who created him. Remember that for us Catholics, it is an insight of natural reason, not divine revelation, that there is a God who has created the world, which is by virtue of that creation intelligible. As Catholics, we are not surprised that individuals are trying to accomplish great good through many of these new procedures and the so-called reproductive technologies. Although even to use the term reproductive instead of procreative, and to apply the notion of technologies to the engendering of new human life, vividly illustrates the dehumanization of the human person which has occurred in our secularized, godless culture. But as I was saying, as Catholics, we ought not to be surprised that individuals are trying to accomplish good through these procedures to overcome infertility or other problems inherent in generating new life. This does not surprise us because the Catholic Church actually espouses a very positive philosophical anthropology or understanding of the human person. The doctrine of the total depravity of man is not of our religious tradition. We believe that what fundamentally drives human behavior is a search for happiness and a desire to do good. People never cease to be amazed when they actually encounter the Catholic understanding of sin. When I met with the other scientists at Advanced Cell Technology after I'd had my discussion with the CEO, I pointed out to them as they sat around the boardroom table that the Catechism of the Catholic Church does not define sin fundamentally as an act against God's will or his commandments or his laws. The Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches that, quote, sin is an offense against reason, truth, and right conscience. It is a failure in genuine love for God and neighbor caused by a perverse attachment to certain goods, end quote. Now, the scientist who had been cloning himself by taking cheek cells and putting his DNA in the enucleated cow's eggs was really struck by this quote. And he said, whoa, sin is an act against reason. I mean, he liked that and began writing it down. He said, where did you get that again? And I said, it was from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which is the compendium of the beliefs of the Church. He just couldn't believe that this was a teaching of the Church. But it should be noted that the understanding of sin within the Catholic tradition sees the act as not only, quote, an act against reason, but also as a, quote, perverse attachment to certain goods, end quote. The anthropology of our religious tradition is such that we see even in human sin a natural human attachment to certain goods. Catholics are not surprised when they are told by those whom they are trying to dissuade from immoral actions that these individuals are only trying to do good. This is what we understand to be the motivation for human behavior. The biotech researcher wants to obtain embryonic stem cells, which are pluripotent, to see if he might not be able to tease them into becoming neurological cells to help cure Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease. He has no particular ghoulish pleasure in destroying human embryos. The physician sets about to abort the anencephalic child because he wants to help the parents avoid an emotionally wrenching and difficult birth and early death of their child, not because he hates children. The fertility technician engenders 8 embryos in petri dishes instead of just 1 in order to increase the chances that a couple will be able to overcome their heartbreaking infertility. The surrogate mother, who already has 2 children of her own, is willing to endure the difficulties of another pregnancy in order to help an infertile couple have their own child, or to make more money for her own family. The Catholic is not surprised by the great good all these individuals want to bring about. In fact, as I've said, we expect that they will be so motivated. But the task of the Church and her Magisterium and of each individual Catholic is to bring these people to see that even as they want to do good things, the means they are choosing may themselves not be good. In fact, they may be wretchedly evil because they assault fundamental human goods. The heart of the immoral behavior is not that these people are seeking to do evil, and it is certainly not that these individuals have an attachment to certain goods, there's nothing wrong with that, but rather that the attachment to the goods they seek is disordered in some way. The fundamental moral principle which applies in bioethics is the same which applies in any field of human conduct. It was mentioned earlier, primum non nocere. First of all, do no harm. Of all the actions proposed earlier, the in vitro fertilization or pre-implantation genetic engineering or screening are meant to enhance human happiness and human flourishing. There is the desire to have children when that is not possible, or to avoid children when having them would appear to hurt someone. There is the burning wish to save lives or overcome crippling pathologies. There is, in a word, a desire to promote human flourishing. But the one thing which must be avoided in that pursuit is anything which would diminish human flourishing, which would denigrate human goods, which would violate human dignity because it would vitiate the very good which is being sought. The resolution of these dreadful social and moral evils will be industry, put the lie to the good which is sought. Great human good can come from contemporary advances in microbiology, but these advances will turn to bitter ash if they are achieved at the expense of the human person. This human embryo lying in a petri dish was created a little lower than the angels and is destined to be crowned in glory and honor. To destroy it, to experiment upon it, to use it for the benefit of others, is to violate its dignity and, frankly, the dignity of those who would so use it. The Holy Father wrote, "This century has so far been a century of great calamities for man, of great devastations. Not only material ones, but also moral ones. Indeed, perhaps above all, moral ones. This new century, however, may be one of new human hope. If Catholics and other Christians enthusiastically undertake the re-evangelization of culture under the teaching and governing authority of God's appointed magisterium, because the transcendent vision of the human person must be restored if man is to be safe even in his natural conditions. Thank you. There's 29 minutes, and I'm allowed to take 5 minutes of questions. Yes, Bob?
Thank you, Dr. Haas. It seems that between, at times, the world of the Catholic ethicist, so to speak, and the biotech specialist, there is a gulf of misinformation, ignorance. And I'm just wondering, in light of your conversation with Michael West, what steps ought we to take to engage in a meaningful dialogue and bring those two worlds closer together?
Father said, there appears to be a chasm of misunderstanding between Catholic ethicists and those involved in the human life sciences very often. Remarkably, you will find many people in the human life sciences who are very devout and committed Christians who are in the best position possible to enter into the dialogue with their peers in that kind of situation. The formal occasions in which we can speak to one another are actually provided in fora such as this one. Another thing I think we have to do is be bold enough to call these folks up and say, can I come talk to you? I mean, it was not easy to get in to see Michael West. I worked at it for 3 weeks. I had to go through phalanxes of PR people. But boy, once we sat down across the table with one another, I mean, we really engaged. Now, I gotta say, I didn't convert him. I don't think I came close to converting him, and he didn't convert me. But at least we were able to open the channels for dialogue. So I would say, we use every means at our disposal. There's an ecumenical magazine known as Touchstone. Two of the editors are here today, and I think it was last year, they had an issue on intelligent design, okay, as a means of reaching out and entering into dialogue to those within the scientific community, saying, we have things here in common that we all can see in terms of intelligent design, which might provide a basis for further dialogue. And I try to make the point that another common dimension of our humanity is this desire to do good, that we have to realize that when we do enter into a discussion with these people, that they're generally not hateful people, who are setting out to do evil, but they want to try to do something good, and what we have to bring them to see is that the means that they're choosing for that may not be the best. There's a hand in the back.
Yes, I hope I phrased this question correctly. You called your speech the Magisterium on the cutting edge. Now, I understand the Magisterium to be the living teaching voice of the church, which has expressed through our lives and the bishop's teachings and so on. What I think you presented us with is a beautiful, shall we say, justification for the church's view that can be found in the church's teaching in its catechism. But I do not feel that the living magisterium has done really enough to promote this idea of discussing the ethical issues that we're faced with. For example, let me just say this. I know that the bishops do not have complete control over the universities, but here in Chicago we have some 4 or 5 Catholic universities, and for this ethical gathering to have to be held at the University of Illinois at Chicago, I'm glad it's happening, but I wonder about that.
Well, I'm delighted it's happening here. I mean, the big challenge is to get out into the public forum and to be able to present our views and to engage others in conversation. So, frankly, I'd almost rather have it in this forum. But formally, the Magisterium are the bishops teaching in union with the Bishop of Rome, with the Holy Father. And I think, no, they haven't done enough. Nobody's done enough in any field. But the Magisterium has done remarkable things in engaging the broader society in these debates. The Holy Father has established the Pontifical Academy for Sciences, which has been around for quite a long time. The Church has been a tremendous promoter and supporter of scientific research and advance. You think of and this has been supported by the Magisterium. Galileo got into his problems with the Pope, but there was a cleric, a generation prior to Galileo, who held the same views and didn't get in trouble, and that was Copernicus. There were a lot of other issues that entered into that problem with Galileo and the Pope. But I was having a conversation one time with one of the scientists out in Texas who had actually developed the in vitro fertilization technique in this country, and as the Holy See, the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, which is the dicastery that issued Donum Vitae that I was referring to, was preparing that document, and they sent a delegation to Texas to this fertility clinic to discuss this matter with this physician and his team. So this man, he's a Methodist, and he said, I was dreading the day when these black-robed, scowling men would arrive on my doorstep from Rome. But he said we had a 2-day conference all laid out for them, and he said all of our scientists were there, and we were going to explain the scientific techniques. He said, I was astonished. He said these men, some theologians, some scientists who arrived, knew the techniques of in vitro fertilization down flat. I mean, he said there was absolutely nothing that we could tell them that they didn't know. They couldn't do it. I mean, they weren't able to do the technique, but they knew all the science involved. And he said, so the program only lasted for 1 day because we eliminated the whole first day of the program going over the scientific techniques and began just discussing the moral issues which were engendered by it. So I would say the Magisterium of the Church is very much engaged in reflecting on these kinds of issues. The National Catholic Bioethics Center, which I'm privileged to serve as president for the last 20 years, has had a week-long program for all the bishops from Canada, the United States, Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean in Dallas, Texas, a week-long program on advances in medicine and in the life sciences. It's not advertised. Nobody knows anything about it. But the bishops come and are able to study. We bring in scientists who are top in their field, who may not be Catholic at all. And we have the church, for example, the Magisterium of the church, making pronouncements on such things as the legitimacy of neurologic criteria for determining death, and just quite apart from the topic we're talking about here. So can the Magisterium do more? Yes. Has it been negligent? I would really say no. And I think because, as I was saying earlier, of its understanding of human nature and with a very sophisticated moral tradition that has been refined over the centuries, it is able to enter into these conversations more effectively than virtually any other social institution that we have left. So thank you.